Hey there, friends and comrades. So today I'm going to talk about one of my biggest bugbears, liberalism. So the reason this frustrates me so much is that a lot of people, especially in the States, think that they are liberals because over the past 3 decades, the corporate media, since the Reagan administration, um, basically decided that it was useful to turn the word liberal, which used to mean a very specific type of political philosophy in the centre, was another slur for leftists. So this is a problem because it means we on the left can't distinguish between ourselves and also can't use these different terms to develop our critiques of capitalists, imperialists, white supremacists, heteropatriarchy. So the hope then is that by the end of this video, lots of you will see that you were never liberals to begin with, and some of the rest of you will now reject the term. So before I can talk about this, I have to point out that liberal is one of what we call in philosophy an essentially contested concept. This means, according to the philosopher who coined the phrase, that there will never be and can never be a singular agreed upon definition, and like this is true of things like justice and equality and many other political ideals. So I'm going to give you my understanding of liberalism as someone who's studied the ideology in some depth, but I also don't like liberalism anymore, so maybe it'd be worth finding a liberal who disagrees with me to critique my perspective. So what is it that liberalism purports to do? You might have heard the word liberal used with the word democracy, like we talk about liberal democracy. So what a liberal democracy is a state in which a citizen is attributed certain rights. These rights usually include things like freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom from slavery, the right to vote, and then the idea is to give every citizen a certain, the point of these is to give every citizen a certain base level of protection, which is fair for everyone. So, I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but these rights usually also have a hierarchy amongst themselves. So, like political rights, like the ones I just listed, are at the top, and then there's like often social rights and economic rights that come further down, things like sexual freedom, marriage rights, and the right to an education. Um, so the problem I have with this is that everything I just described, they aren't real, right? They're social constructs, just like masculinity and gender, that only exists in our mind as social institutions. So what this means is they don't um, they don't affect the material world except through the way that they're implemented. So this is important, and I'm quite fortunate to be able to explain this to you guys because you're Tumblr people, um, as you'll see. So liberalism, being based around an ideal of universal human rights, creates what my lecturer Sherilyn calls a false universal we, where we're basically all just humans and the rules are fair for everyone, and so there shouldn't be a problem. So you might be starting to see the crux of the problem. We all know that just because, for instance, a black person or a white person living in Ferguson both have the concept of a right to a fair trial, doesn't mean that they'll be treated the same in the eyes of the police. Even though actually in many so-called liberal democracies there's even a very specific right against racial discrimination. It's almost like writing it down doesn't solve the problem. Like another example would be that just because you have a right to an education, unless someone makes schools free and gives you the resources to go to school, that right is meaningless, right? It's the material things that are important. So that's why those of us to the left of liberalism, left this way on your screen, call ourselves materialists. So this is another word that's sort of been misused. Materialist in this sense doesn't mean consumerist. It means interested in outcomes, not ideals. Liberalism, on the other hand, is an idealist ethic. Again, another word we've lost the meaning of. But what idealist here means isn't airy-fairy and hopeful, but that it is idealistic based on an ideal, right? It's based on an idea, a concept held up as good. So materialists like me say that the ideal is all well and good, but what we actually need is material change. Passing a bill into law saying that black people can't be killed by the state does nothing if police officers who do it always get off scot-free. Like, black people are still dying, but don't worry, guys, we passed a nice law and everything should be fine now. It doesn't change anything. So I also don't want this to sound like liberalism has totally won in society, even on the left, because it hasn't. So I can show this with another example. Candidate quotas, or sometimes called positive discrimination or affirmative action and other things as well. These are when, for example, a political party or a corporation or any organisation is forced to make the effort so that, for example, 30% of its candidates are women or people of colour or disabled people or LGBTIQ people or whatever else. And these are a form of illiberal solution, right? They're not liberal. And illiberal solutions to problems that even the Democratic Party has taken on board. So they're illiberal in the sense that they bend rules away from being exactly the same to everyone in order to deal with structural systemic inequalities that exist in society. So a liberal idealist philosophy says, we will end any explicit discrimination in the laws and ethics of the land, for example, women not being able to vote or racialized segregation, and then we will each of us be the best person we can be and everything will be okay. A materialist one, on the other hand, says, actually, the law is a comparatively small part of what inequality is about. There is a lot of other stuff going on that needs dealing with, and these laws that people keep making never seem to apply evenly anyway. So, I mean, there's a lot more I could say on the subject, and I haven't even touched on property rights, which is the other main pillar of liberalism, arguably the most important, which defines it away from other forms of leftism, like anarcho-communism, for instance. But hopefully I'll come to that in my next video on the inherent unsustainability of capitalism. So I'll just say one more thing. The thing I found in my interviews with people in various parts of the left for my master's was that the difference between idealist liberal leftists and what I think of as materialist intersectionalist leftists is that we broadly agree in terms of our utopias, right, in the world we want to create. The ideal futures that we imagine as aiming towards are broadly similar. The big difference, comes in terms of strategy for getting there. So liberals try to create the utopia as best as they can in the present. So which is why they're often skeptical of safe spaces, of quotas. They appeal to the logic of argument over personal experience because those things are often inevitably biased. So materialist intersectionalists, on the other hand, say, yes, we do want to reach a world in which we don't need safe spaces, where we don't need gender quotas, where we don't need to sit down and shut up and stay in our lane. But the only way to get to that world is to directly oppose and directly work against the inequalities of present society, not to pretend that they don't exist and just keep marching onwards, reproducing the same structural problems. So this might mean making rules that aren't what we want in our utopia in order to get to a place where these rules can fall away. So to recap, liberalism is about ideals, rights, laws, a universalizing way of seeing human beings in order to be fair to everyone. Materialist ethics are ones that say that these ideals actually hide structural inequalities in society. And while they're nice in theory, they don't actually get to the root of the problem. I hope I've made this clear enough. I understand it's super complicated trying to understand liberalism, partly, which is why it's so successful. But once you start to be able to tease out the differences, I do find it's incredibly helpful. So thanks for listening. Bye bye. Ciao, friends. Mwah.